But we begin with what a BC Supreme Court judge describes as egregious conduct by the RCMP. This in the case of the couple who planted bombs at the British Columbia legislature 3 years ago. In a scathing decision, the judge says without the deceit, threats, and encouragement of police, that plot would never have been carried out. John Nuttall and Amanda Kuroti were found guilty last year on 3 terrorism-related charges. But today, the judge entered a stay of proceedings. In her ruling, she said the police went too far in tricking the couple. It's a sentiment shared by Nuttall's mother.
There's some dirty ones, like the ones that my son had to deal with. Those people, I hope that they get what they deserve. But I still, in general, I have respect for the police, and I just pray that this kind of stuff never, ever happens again.
You have to look at the circumstances of this case. This was a case where the more time the police spent with it, the more it was apparent there was no risk, and yet they then moved to manufacture a crime.
The judge said for defendants to serve a life sentence for a crime that police facilitated by instilling fear that they would be killed if they backed out is offensive to our concept of justice. She concluded, simply put, the world has enough terrorists. We don't need police to create more out of marginalized people who have neither the capacity nor sufficient motivation to do it themselves. So let's get some background on this case. Stephanie Mercier joins us now. And Stephanie, let's start with this massive investigation, the surveillance tape, lots of insight into it. How did that unfold?
Right. So the RCMP first got onto this couple a few months before this. Some public tips had come in that they were espousing violent, radical extremist beliefs. So the RCMP launched this investigation involving more than 200 officers and featuring one undercover agent who posed as an Arab businessman and befriended the couple. They became friends quite quickly, and John Nuttall started talking about his interest in making bombs and doing jihad. And from there, the investigation went on, and they ended up creating these bombs and planting them at the legislature. And
there were some fanciful, erratic plans before that, talking about commandeering a nuclear sub or a passenger train on Vancouver Island. So it was shocking at the time. Stephanie, thank you very much. To give you a sense of just how shocking it was, listen to what Premier Christy Clark said after the arrests.
What they wanted to accomplish was more than just to harm individuals on that day. What they want to do is the same thing that terrorists want to do all over the world, and that is rob us of our sense of security, to rob us of our sense that this place belongs to us.
But the judgment points out it was the RCMP who led Nuttall and Kuroti to the legislature, even pointing to some bushes where they could hide the bombs, part of what the judge described as the overzealous conduct by officers. Well, there's so much to analyze here, and let's bring in Erica Tardy, a criminal defense lawyer who we often turn to in legal cases. And overall, your reaction to this decision?
Well, it's a fairly astounding verdict. I mean, the judge here has made very strong findings of fact that this terror plot, but for the actions of the RCMP, would never have taken place, and really finds as a fact that this was an RCMP-led and constructed plot, and that Nuttall and Kuroti, the two defendants here, really were bit players that were dragged along from the beginning until the end. And the language that she uses in the course of the judgment and her kind of cascading findings of inappropriate conduct on the part of the RCMP are fairly broad, and in a high-profile case like this, as I say, astounding.
When you say astounding, though, you're not taking issue with her conclusions, but just what she uncovered. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking about an extremely lengthy judgment, well in excess of 900 paragraphs, I mean, she backs up all of her findings of fact, which are extensive, setting out in detail misconduct on the part of the police, suggesting that in fact they engaged in some criminal activity themselves that wasn't pre-authorized, as is supposed to happen in these kinds of investigations. So it's a well-written, very strongly worded indictment of the investigation from start to finish in this case that'll have implications for the RCMP going forward.
there's such a high standard, depending on your perspective, on the conduct of the state, of police and prosecutors, that sometimes there are cases where someone is acquitted, for example, even though it seems pretty clear on the facts they did it, but it's because, let's say, evidence was brought in by the police illegally. So I wondered at the beginning of the day, before I read these reasons, whether this was a case of, these guys were terrorists that did bad things, but the police acted badly. That doesn't seem to be the case here. This judge seems to be saying very clearly, these two never would have been able to formulate a real plan.
Right. I mean, you're right, and there's a difference in quality and types of verdicts. And sometimes it's an acquittal on a technical aspect, and sometimes it's almost a declaration of factual innocence. And here, rather than just some technical finding of entrapment, the police overstepped a little bit in encouraging these people to engage in this plot. These are extremely strong findings that without the police involvement, there would have been no plot. These people would have done nothing to further their extremist views. And as I say, throughout the process, she quotes one of the officers as talking about taking them along in baby steps throughout the process in this plot, buying all of the goods themselves. There's lots of evidence that suggests, rather than just satisfying themselves that there wasn't a plot and moving on, that the RCMP had to find a plot, and they constructed it themselves.
They are not, however, the most sympathetic of accused here. They did have some odious beliefs. They did, and the judge makes this very clear, they were sympathetic to terror attacks, but not capable of actually, creating a plot here. But I wonder, in this case, they've spent 3 years behind bars for something that really, they wouldn't have been able to do without the police involvement. In a case like this, given that stinging rebuke by the judge, is this the kind of case where they would have some kind of reasonable grounds of being able to win a lawsuit against the state, let's say, for malicious prosecution?
Sure. Well, I think that's something that they would definitely be looking at. You're right. They're not the most sympathetic individuals, but certainly no one in this country is going to be jailed for inappropriate or even offensive political beliefs. And as I say, the judge in this ruling has created a factual template of really bad findings of no credibility amongst several officers, misconduct on the part of officers, and just a misguided investigation from beginning to end. And so when you've got those kind of facts, I'm sure they'll take some civil advice and whether there's a cause of action here, and I'm sure that there'll be an appeal on the part of the Crown, hoping to upend some of these findings of fact.
Yeah, and we know in fact an appeal has been filed. What do you think the message should be here for Crown prosecutors across the country, and particularly for police officers across the country? What should they be reading from this?
I think we see from time to time that in the climate in which we live, where there's this climate of fear and reality-based fear of terrorist activities, that they really have to be duly diligent, that if they investigate something and they come to the end of the road and it's not a viable threat, that they can hand it back to CSIS and move on to real credible threats against Canadian society. It doesn't seem that they did that here. The judge notes they could have done that, and in the future, despite political pressure, despite the need to have a case and a prosecution go forward, I would like to think that the RCMP and other investigative agencies will think about this case and maybe have some sober second thought before they decide to go ahead in the manner that they did in this case.
All right, Eric. Thank you very much.
Thank you.